it's like, okay, you have representatives of so many different countries here. That in itself, just you feel that, kind of greatness, like that collaboration between the world is happening right now. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. But on the lighter side of things, whenever you like sit down in that Spain chair or you're representing whatever country, do you kind of like emotionally put on that hat or that face, figuratively, of like that country? It's like, all right, if you're a really straight, like German style person, but somehow you got the job to represent Spain, do you start loosening up, loosen your tie, maybe take a couple chupitos, boom, boom? It's like, all right, loosen up. Do you ever
Well,
like joke about that with the other people that, are representing countries, of like embracing stereotypes, I guess?
yeah, it's the diplomatic word is a very strict. Is very strict in on this aspect, especially on formal meetings. So you don't really see stereotypes about countries in the formal meeting. But then maybe when you meet the diplomats out of the meeting, because we are at the end we are colleagues, we see each other every day, and like you can make some friends between them, and like go party with them, take drinks, and even some of them invited me for dinner at their house. They introduced me to their families. And that's the those in those moments you can see that, yeah, from one culture to another you see some differences. But um, but as you say, like when you go to this meeting, you take the hat. Hey, I'm the guy representing Spain, so I'm here to like just to say the position, the diplomatic position of the country I'm representing. But I cannot be in the meeting with chupitos or or sangria or anything. We're not at the Simpsons,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this episode of the Simpsons, in which, like, there is many episodes, in fact, of the Simpsons in which they show the UN, and yeah, in this episode you see many cliches. um, but sometimes you feel the moment, maybe the importance of the moment. I remember at that time, we were at the top of the humanitarian crisis in Syria, and Spain was part of the Security Council. And I remember sometimes we were negotiating hours and hours to ask the Russians to let us have a humanitarian corridor, to let the humanitarian NGOs access to the population, the civil population, and give them food, give them medical assistance, all these kind of things. And I think, yeah, it wasn't always a success. We had some victories, but the humanitarian situation was that bad that I don't consider that as a success, because that's politics at the end. The Russian delegation had the interest to defend, and they were different to the Spanish delegation. Um, but yeah, you I think when you are in this kind of meetings, you have topics that are bigger than you, and you don't think about those jokes, you know.
Yeah, definitely. You have a
But
job to do, and there's a lot that's waiting for you to execute and dependent upon,
yeah,
whatever results you bring back.
exactly.
But wow, can you talk more about um that objective you had to negotiate a corridor? What was that? A corridor for
A
the
humanitarian corridor. So a corridor in a country in a country where armed conflict is happening. It's a kind of territory that we agree that we will have no military operations from any side, to make sure that the humanitarian delegation, like mainly the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, can access to the villages where uh, we know that the civil population is that was not able to escape is living, so to allow them to bring assistance. And so It's very hard because at that moment it was the the top of the conflict. We know now that the Syrian regime is still in power, and it was at that moment that the events were turning in their favor, and they didn't want to stop the military operations because they needed to get advantage in to the opposition and also to ISIS, in front of ISIS. Uh, so I know they have from their point of view they have legitimate interest to do that, and for them they maybe they think this civil population, even if they are suffering, the interest of our nation is bigger than them. I don't agree with that with them, but that's how they were thinking. And
Mm.
for them, when we're talking about humanitarian corridor, it wasn't part of their priorities. So we had some victories at some point. We achieved to get this humanitarian corridor, but we lost a lot of time. And I think when you lose time in this kind of situation, you lose lives as well. So
Yeah.
that's the UN as well. You know, you think that it's great and that's where you make peace, um, but in fact, at the end, that's the sovereignty of every state, and the sovereignty of every state makes that the UN is not able to impose peace. You know, and you need to go through negotiation, mediation, to get an achievement.
Right.
So yeah.
And is that multilateral diplomacy? Like, what does that term mean?
Exactly. So yeah, while we were preparing this podcast, I told you a lot about multilateral diplomacy.
It's a
Um,
very nice word. It seems to really have some profound, significance.
yeah, I agree. So just to explain quickly, so diplomacy can have diverse dimensions. The most basic diplomacy is bilateral diplomacy. Like for example, you are the ambassador of the United States. I am the Tunisian government. So your work as an ambassador of the United States in Tunisia is to focus on the bilateral relationship between our both countries. And your only work is to make sure that the interests of the United States in Tunisia are protected, and to make sure that the Tunisians are happy about this relationship. And if you figure out that there is something that is not accepted by the Tunisian, to make sure that people in Washington know that and take the decision in function of that. So sometimes the government of the US will tell you, okay, you have to fix that. Or sometimes they will tell you, they're not happy, not our problem. For us, the interest of the US is bigger than their satisfaction. It's basic diplomacy. And the job of the Tunisian ambassador in DC is the same. uh, make sure to protect the interests of Tunisia in the United States. So this is basic diplomacy, bilateral diplomacy. But then you have other dimensions. You have regional
Oh,
diplomacy.
sorry. Just
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. You're saying bilateral?
bilateral, which means it's only two
Just
countries.
two.
Exactly,
Gotcha.
two. You have as well regional diplomacy. I will give you an example. You know that Canada, US, and Mexico have a free trade agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, I think.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. NAFTA.
NAFTA, exactly. Thank you. So, because I know the word in French, it's ALENA, Accord de
Yeah, and
libre.
I only know the acronym, so I was
Yeah,
like, wait. Yeah.
NAFTA, exactly. So, regional diplomacy, in this case, for example, it's about three countries, and they have to make agreements to improve the trade between the three countries. And the objective is that if you have free trade between the three countries, every company from any of those three countries have access to a bigger market. So the NAFTA market, which is huge, because if you take the population of Canada, the US, and the Mexico, you're almost 500 million of population, you know. And you have the same thing in the European Union. It's 27 countries that agree to put some power in common, some governance in common, in order to have a bigger European market and to improve trade and then development to for those countries. So this is regional diplomacy, and you do it between neighbors, and most of the time it's only for economic purposes. It can have some exceptions. For example, you have the NATO, which is for military purposes. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and is to make sure that there is military cooperation between European countries and countries and the US and Canada. And then you have multilateral diplomacy. Multilateral diplomacy, it's the idea that there is issues that have an international relevance. It's not only when there is, for example, armed conflict that can create a genocide, or where you can have war crimes. It's not about the country A and the country B that are in an armed conflict, but it's about the international community, because we are humans and we think that human rights have to be protected, humanitarian rights have to be defended, and it's all the international community that has something to say to defend those values. And then we talk about those issues at the global level. So as it doesn't matter if you are a country from Asia, from South America, from Africa, from Europe. We all have to find a solution, and we all have to bring the two parts of this conflict to talk about it and to find a way to make peace. That's the idea of multilateral diplomacy. It first appeared as an organization after the First World War in 1919. We had the League of Nations that was based in Geneva. But the problem of the League of Nations is that it was created by the winners of the war. So basically the US, UK, France, but the losers had much less power in this organization, and mainly Germany. And those countries felt that this organization was not balanced and was just serving the interest of the winners of the war. And that's why after the crisis of 1929, you know, the big economic crisis, Germany was suffering poverty, and they had a guy called Adolf Hitler that I think you heard about him.
Yeah. Never
That
forget.
was using the suffering of this poverty to, of course, to be xenophobic and anti-Semitic, of course, but was also criticizing the outcome of the League of Nations, and was telling about people that that Germany was humiliated by this organization and the treaties that created this organization, and decided to progressively be out of this organization. And that's why they did their project in by their side, and stage by little by little we arrived to the Second World War. And that's the big fail for multilateral diplomacy, because it wasn't a balanced organization, and then dialogue between nations was impossible. And when nations stop to talk, well, they fight, and that's how we have a huge world war as we had in between 39 and 45. That's why, knowing all this background, the countries after the Second World War decided to create the United Nations organization that was actually founded by the Treaty of San Francisco. You are in San Diego, it's California, so you're not that far. And actually, if you visit San Francisco, you have the United Nations Plaza, and on this plaza you have a federal building of the U.S. And I think I'm not sure about it, but that's what people told me in San Francisco, but haven't checked yet. So fact-checking people in the comment, you can tell us. But in this building, that's where they negotiated the charter of the United Nations, and the charter is kind of the constitution of the United Nations. Um, so the United Nations is the place nowadays where multilateral diplomacy is alive, because it's the place, I think it's one of the only organizations in the world where all the countries present on Earth are represented, which makes well, like, there is some exceptions to what I'm saying, but let's say 193 is almost all the countries around the world. And uh, that's where countries meet when there is issues that have international relevance. So of course I told you about the armed conflicts, but there is other issues, like for example, human rights. So many people knows about the Universal Declaration on the human rights that was negotiated in Paris, actually. And the same, if you go to Trocadero in Paris, you have the Human Rights Plaza. It's because that's the building where it was negotiated, and it was negotiated by Eleanor Roosevelt, that the wife of the President Roosevelt, that was the first woman representing the U.S. as an ambassador to the UN. So she was the one who had the leadership and negotiated that, and had and made it, actually. And I have to recall that at that moment it was we had the Soviet Union, and we were close to the beginning of the Cold War. And even beside that, she made it. And so a very good achievement. But yeah, you have in the UN mutual diplomacy for peace, so military peace, of course, human rights, um, sustainable development, that we can talk about it, but the UN also works about ending the poverty, and fight against the climate change. So find solutions so to stop the effects of climate change. So that's the four big issues at the UN that all the countries work about all together, and they have objectives. And it's been now more than 70 years that it exists. The work is not perfect, but I think it's the less worse we can have nowadays. I'm
So
sorry
70,
for yeah, for this speech.
70 years ago, you're saying it started, and the
A
goals.
bit more, a bit more. It was approved in 45, so it's like 76 years ago or something like that.
Yes. Okay. So the goals, I'm sure, change. Every time they meet, they would check on them.
Hmm.
They need to be changed or altered, or how are you guys doing with meeting these goals and checking in? How have they changed, and where are they at now? You mentioned sustainability and poverty. What are those goals? Do you know?
Yeah. So in 2015, the UN approved the 2030 agenda on sustainable development goals. There are 17. I don't know if you can show them on the screen for for the audience, but you can go just on Google, put UN SDGs 2030 agenda, and you will have the 17 goals. Uh, I don't have them by memory, but the main of them is eradicate extreme poverty, zero hunger, give access to education to all children, um, have sustainable cities, have a sustainable industry, limit the impacts of climate change, um, give access to electricity to all population around the world. Um, so as you can see, like there are 17 goals, and it's not useful that I give you all of them, and I have to admit that I don't know them by memory, but you can go
Yeah.
on internet and check them. But the main idea is that we have to bring all the conditions that we need to end poverty anywhere on the world, but by doing it in a sustainable way. So by respecting the environment and maybe not using the same development model as we had in the developed countries, like in Europe or US, because like we have especially in the 19th century, those countries polluted a lot. And the idea is to say to the developing countries that you guys can make development, can end poverty without using the same model, the same trajectory, by respecting the environment. And the UN is here for that, and the developed countries are here to support you in choosing this model of new development. So it was approved by the UN, so by all the countries, and many countries committed on that. The developing countries committed on those objectives, and the developed countries committed on funding those objectives. And yeah, I know COVID that was not a part of the plan, but the objective is to make it by 2030.
Yeah, that's pretty lofty. And COVID, I'm sure, threw a big curveball in there.
Mm.
But those you said, and I just looked them up as you were talking. There is no poverty is number one, and then
Mm.
number
No,
two
no
is
extreme poverty. No extreme
uh,
poverty. Yeah,
and then no hunger.
yeah,
It's like these are really lofty, and 2030 is pretty close now.
yeah.
Uh, is that are we kind of on pace, or like how could we achieve that? Is that possible? What do you think it's actually like
Well,
attainable?
so personally, I would say it's hard. But that's the same thing. If I was speaking in the name of Spain, I would tell you we have those policies to make it happen, and we will make it happen. But as Becem, I would tell you it's not easy. But I like the idea to have, even for my personal life, so not only on the UN, but I like the idea of to have the high ambition and do your best to make it happen, than reducing the ambitions from the moment zero, and then eliminating any possibility that the best project can happen. And I think that's what the decision makers at the UN choose to do. They're not enjoying. They are not. They know that they will still have challenges in 2030, but that's what we have to make. That's what we need to have as an objective. And this 2030 agenda is not only a paper; it's like the structure of the policy of the UN currently. And now, for example, if any country comes to the UN or to the World Bank asking for help, sometime we can tell him, well, you're asking, for example, $100 million to fund this project of, I don't know, sanitation or industry in your country. But this project doesn't respect the objective, I don't know, number 13, that is protect the climate, protect the earth against climate change. Or maybe this hospital you're making in your countries is only for male people and not for female people, so you're not respecting the gender equality. So by time, those countries have to integrate those objectives in their policies if they want to get assistance. you know and it's the same thing for people that give money for developing for development projects, they always, like, I don't know, US or China or Japan, they need to respect those objectives if they want to help other developing countries through the UN or their agencies. So this is itself, maybe it's something we can see as a concrete change, but in the methodology of work of the UN and their agencies like UNICEF or UNDP or UN Women, it's important because they have to follow this methodology. And we see we have to keep monitoring the implementation of this agenda and do our best to make it happen.